Part 1. The Whispering Tree. In the heart of a remote village, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, there was a legend that had been passed down for generations. It was a story about a ghost, but not just any ghost, a ghost that haunted an ancient tree. This tree was unlike any other in the village. It was an enormous oak, its bark weathered and twisted, its branches stretching like gnarled fingers into the sky, reaching toward the heavens as if grasping for something just out of reach. The villagers called it the Whispering Tree, for it was said that the wind that passed through its branches carried not only the sounds of the forest, but the whispers of those who had come before. The Whispering Tree stood at the edge of the village, at the point where the thick, dark forest began. It was a place that everyone avoided after nightfall, for it was believed that someone watched over it from the shadows, something that was not entirely of this world. But the legend behind the tree, the story of the ghost that haunted it, began long before anyone could remember. It was the story of Eliza, a young woman whose name was whispered with reverence and sorrow even years after her death. Part 2. The Tragic Love Story. Eliza had been a village girl, known for her beauty and gentle nature. She had grown up in a small cottage with her parents and younger brother, just on the outskirts of the village. The villagers had always admired her. Her laughter was like the sound of spring rain, and her smile had the warmth of the sun after a long winter. But there was something about her that made her different from the other girls. She was destined for more than a quiet life in the village. Eliza had always been in love with the young man from the neighboring village, a strong, kind-hearted man named Samuel. He was a blacksmith's son, and though his family was not wealthy, he had a strong spirit and a brave heart that had captured Eliza's affection from the moment they had met. They would meet secretly in the forest, away from prying eyes, where they could be themselves without fear of being judged. But their love was not meant to be. Eliza's parents had already arranged a marriage for her with a wealthy merchant from the city, a man who had the resources to secure their family's future. He was older than Eliza, and though he was kind enough, Eliza had never felt anything more than obligation toward him. She did not love him. She loved Samuel, the man who could not offer her riches or status but gave her something far more valuable, genuine love and devotion. Their secret meetings continued for months, until one evening, as the village gathered for a festival, Eliza found herself torn between her love for Samuel and her duty to her family. Her heart ached as she walked toward the grand hall, where her betrothed awaited her, dressed in a fine suit. She glanced back over her shoulder, hoping to catch one last glimpse of Samuel in the crowd. But he was gone. Heartbroken, Eliza found herself alone, standing beneath the Whispering Tree, the place where she and Samuel had once shared their dreams. The tree had always been their special place, a sanctuary where their love had blossomed away from the watchful eyes of the village. That night, as the festival roared in the distance, Eliza sat beneath the tree and wept. Her tears mingled with the falling rain, her heart breaking under the weight of duty and desire. She had to make a choice: stay with her family or run away with Samuel. But in her despair, she could not make a decision. The storm that night was fierce. The wind howled through the branches of the tree, as if the spirits of the forest themselves were mourning with her. In a fit of grief, Eliza cried out to the heavens, begging for a sign, a reason to live without this overwhelming sorrow. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the tree. The thunder cracked so loudly that it shook the ground beneath her feet. Eliza screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. As the lightning struck, she felt the life drain from her body, the force of the blow knocking her unconscious. Part 3. The Haunting Begins. When the villagers discovered Eliza's body the next morning, they could not understand what had happened. There were no signs of injury, and the tree where she had been sitting was completely unharmed. But it was clear that Eliza was dead. Her body had been found at the foot of the Whispering Tree, her face peaceful, yet her eyes wide open in terror. Rumors began to spread. Some said that Eliza had been struck by lightning, while others believed that she had died of a broken heart. But the strangest rumors began to emerge, that her soul had been claimed by the tree. The Whispering Tree, they said, had taken Eliza as its own, trapping her spirit in its ancient roots. As the days turned into weeks, the villagers began to notice strange occurrences around the tree. People who passed by late at night would hear soft whispers carried by the wind, calling their names. Others reported seeing a pale figure standing in the shadows of the tree, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by long, dark hair. But the most disturbing reports came from those who claimed to have seen Eliza herself hanging from one of the tree's lowest branches, her body swaying in the wind. Her eyes were said to be empty, hollow, and filled with an overwhelming sadness. Some villagers swore they could feel her presence when they were near the tree, a chill creeping up their spines, as if the very air had been touched by death. Part 4. The Ghost's Warning. Years passed, and the whispering tree became more than just a legend, it became a place of fear. The village grew, and more people moved in, but no one dared go near the tree after sunset. Parents warned their children to stay away from the forest, especially at night, for fear of encountering the ghostly figure that haunted the tree. But one night, a young man named Thomas, full of curiosity and bravery, decided he would uncover the truth. Armed with nothing but a lantern and his courage, Thomas set out into the woods. He had heard the stories, of course, but he wasn't afraid. He believed in logic, in reason. Ghosts, he thought, were simply the product of imagination. As he approached the whispering tree, the wind seemed to grow colder, the air heavier. His lantern flickered as though it, too, feared the tree. When Thomas reached the tree, he could hear it, the faint whispering that had driven so many villagers away. It was a soft murmur, like voices carried by the wind, but when he tried to focus, the words seemed to vanish into the night. And then, he saw it. Hanging from one of the lower branches was a figure, a woman dressed in white, her long, dark hair blowing in the wind. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, staring directly at Thomas. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he stepped forward, the figure seemed to notice him. Instead of the terrifying appearance he had expected, he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of something familiar. It was as though the ghost knew him, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "Who are you?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely a breath. The figure did not speak. Instead, it began to slowly fade into the air, its form dissolving into the night like mist. As the last of the figure disappeared, Thomas was left standing alone, his heart racing. He had come for answers, but what he found was far more than he had ever expected. Part 5. The Curse of the Tree. The next morning, Thomas left the village. He never spoke of what he had seen beneath the tree, but the villagers noticed something had changed in him. He was no longer the curious, fearless young man who had once sought the truth. He was quieter, more solemn, and always looked over his shoulder as if something were following him. And so, the legend of Eliza and the whispering tree lived on, a tale passed down through generations. The tree stood silent, its branches forever reaching for the sky, as the wind whispered its mournful song, a song of love lost, of life taken too soon, and of a ghost who could never be free. Eliza's ghost, tethered to the tree by a powerful sorrow that transcended death, was a tragic reminder of the love that was never allowed to flourish. The villagers whispered that her spirit was trapped, unable to find peace because her love for Samuel had been left unresolved. And even in death, she longed for him. But what most didn't know was that her torment was not only born from her unrequited love, it came from the overwhelming feeling of being abandoned by life itself, by fate. Eliza was not just grieving for the man she had lost, but for a future stolen from her, one where she had no choice, no voice in her own fate. Her family's expectations had chained her, and the societal pressure to conform had smothered her happiness. Death had been her escape, but it was not freedom, it was a twisted form of entrapment. The tree had become her prison, and she was its unwilling inmate, hanging in the balance between two worlds. The branches, which once offered solace in her final moments, now stood as cruel reminders of her broken dreams. Her restless spirit, unable to move on, sought to make others feel the weight of her despair. Part 7. The Silent Connection. Thomas's encounter with Eliza's spirit marked the beginning of an unsettling journey, one that he could not ignore. In the days that followed, Thomas felt a strange heaviness in the air, an unshakable presence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the soft whispering wind that always seemed to carry Eliza's name. But it wasn't just her voice he heard. No, it was as if she had spoken to him in his dreams, reaching out to him with a silent plea. In his nightmares, he would stand beneath the tree, unable to move, as Eliza's eyes would lock onto his. There was no anger in her gaze, no hatred, only a profound sadness that pierced his heart. In those moments, he knew she wasn't just a ghost. She was a soul desperate for closure, for someone to understand the deep wounds she had carried in life and death. Thomas had been raised with an ironclad belief in logic and reason. But as the days wore on, the lines between reality and the supernatural began to blur. He started to feel that he was no longer just witnessing Eliza's grief. He was becoming part of it. Her sorrow seeped into his own soul, her unresolved pain entangling with his thoughts. It was as if she was slowly weaving herself into the fabric of his existence. One cold evening, as the harvest moon cast its pale glow over the village, Thomas found himself standing once more beneath the whispering tree. His breath was shallow, his body tense, as the whispers began, like a chorus of voices, murmuring from the wind. "Eliza," he whispered, unsure of whether he was speaking to the ghost or to himself. "What do you want from me?" At that moment, the air grew colder, the leaves rustling in a frantic dance. The shadows of the tree seemed to stretch further, as though the branches were reaching out, longing to wrap themselves around him. And then, just as he had felt the chill creeping through his bones, he saw her again. Eliza was standing at the foot of the tree, her long dark hair flowing like a river of ink, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. This time, there was no sway to her figure. She stood still, as if waiting for him to move, to act. "Why are you here?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. The figure did not speak, but the sadness in her eyes deepened. She slowly lifted her hand and pointed to the tree, and then to herself. It was as though she was telling him that she was trapped there, bound to the place where she had taken her last breath, her spirit tethered to the pain she had never been able to escape. Suddenly, the whispering grew louder, and Thomas felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, grief, loss, and an aching loneliness that seemed to seep into his very soul. He understood now. Eliza wasn't just seeking revenge or haunting the tree for the sake of terror. She was lost. She was searching for something, a way to make peace with her past, a way to be free. Part 8. The Forgotten Promise. The more Thomas delved into Eliza's past, the more he began to unravel the truth of her life, of the promises made and broken, of the love she had once shared with Samuel, and of the family that had bound her in chains of duty and obligation. It was in the old village records that he found the truth. Eliza had been promised to a man she had never loved. Samuel, the man she had given her heart to, had tried to run away with her, but they had been caught. It was said that on the night of her death, Eliza had made one final plea to her parents to be allowed to marry Samuel, to live a life of her own choosing. But her parents had refused, and in a fit of anger and heartbreak, she had gone to the tree. Her death, it seemed, had not been an accident. It was her heart breaking in the storm, her soul screaming for freedom, that had caused the lightning to strike. In that moment she had cursed the tree, and with that curse, she had bound herself to it, unable to move on. Thomas, now consumed with guilt, knew what he had to do. The ghost of Eliza was not just seeking peace for herself, she was seeking justice. She had been denied her right to love, to live freely, and now it was up to him to set things right. Part 9. The Release. On the night of the next full moon, Thomas stood beneath the tree once more. This time, he was not afraid. He had come to understand Eliza's pain, to feel her heartache as his own, and in his heart, he knew what he had to do. With trembling hands, he placed a single white rose at the base of the tree. It was the same flower that Eliza had once worn in her hair when she and Samuel had met in secret. He whispered a prayer, asking for forgiveness for Eliza, for Samuel, and for the village that had condemned her to such a tragic fate. As he finished, the wind died down, and the whispers faded into silence. For the first time, the tree seemed at peace. The branches no longer creaked, the shadows no longer stretched, and in the stillness of the night, Thomas felt a soft presence at his side. Turning, he saw Eliza, her form now glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She smiled at him, not the sad, mournful expression of earlier, but a smile full of gratitude. Her eyes locked onto his for one final moment, and in that gaze Thomas understood. Eliza was free. Her spirit had found its peace, her love had been acknowledged, and the tree that had once held her captive had let her go. With a final glance, Eliza vanished into the night, her presence fading like the wind. The whispering tree, now silent, stood tall in the moonlight, a symbol of a love that had endured beyond death, and a ghost who had finally found her rest. Several years passed after Eliza's spirit was released, and the village slowly began to heal. The whispering tree stood as a silent sentinel, its twisted branches still reaching toward the heavens. The villagers, who had once feared it, no longer avoided the tree. They spoke of Eliza's tragic love as a lesson in the power of freedom and choice. But sometimes, On nights when the moon was full and the wind howled through the branches, some villagers would swear they heard a faint whisper, just a soft murmur in the wind, one that felt familiar, like a voice from the past. Thomas, now an older man, returned to the village one last time, years after the events had passed. The village had changed, but there was something about the place that tugged at his heart. He stood beneath the whispering tree, and as the wind stirred, he closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he thought he felt a soft touch on his shoulder, as if Eliza was still there, watching over him with gratitude. He smiled gently, understanding that while her spirit had been freed, a piece of her love, her story would always remain in the heart of the village, carried by the whispers of the wind. And so, the legend of the Whispering Tree lived on not just as a tale of sorrow, but as one of redemption, love, and the enduring power of the human spirit.